Welcome, as I said before, to this the first seminar that we have on from not seminar, webinar from the CORALIS project, a series of 5 webinars that we will have when we discuss industrial symbiosis. And industrial symbiosis is at its core essentially trying to turn things which are byproducts or waste into something which is useful. And this is done in collaboration between industry, but it can also extend to sort of utility sharing and other forms of collaboration between different industries. And of course, there are several technical challenges with these initiatives. But often the challenge is not so much on the technical side, it can be on the collaborative side and getting stakeholders involved, engaged, and mobilized. And today we have 2 people who will talk about this subject. We'll have Johannes Lindorfer and Melanie Knöbl from the Energy Institute at Johannes Kepler University in Linz. And they will talk to you about 2 cases mainly that they have been working with for the past 5 years within an EU project, an EU Horizon 2020 project called CORALIS. So they will talk about these 2 cases. That's how we will start. And then at the end, they will present a roadmap. And we will also take some questions at the end for all of us to, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat during the webinar, and we will get back to them at the end. Great. Maybe Johannes and Melanie, before we start on talking about the cases, maybe you could just briefly say a few words about yourselves and your background.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianna, for the kind introduction. A very warm hello to all participants this afternoon. My name is Johannes Lindorfer. I'm working for the Energy Institute at the Johannes Kepler University in Linz, Austria. More precisely for the technology department there. What we're doing is more accompanying research on technological developments. And one core topic that more frequently pops up is not just a technology developed on one side at the company specifically, but more also about collaboration when implementing new systems, new technologies in terms of sharing resources, sharing facilities, and that is absolutely, let's say, in the spirit of industrial symbiosis, which is also the topic for today. Hello, hello.
Well, good afternoon also from my side. My name is Melanie Knöbl. I am also working at the Energy Institute at JKU at the Department of Energy Economics. And I have a background in social sciences. And nowadays I am mostly working focusing on socio-technical and socio-economic analysis, and also therefore mostly stakeholder analysis and acceptance analysis. So hello from my side.
Before you tell us a little bit about the cases, maybe just a few words. Why is mobilizing stakeholders so important for industrial symbiosis? Why is this topic crucial?
What we've seen basically on all projects that involves technological developments, that involves potential cooperation between actors, not just between industries, but also on a broader perspective, onboarding government bodies, public authorities, and so on. It is really essential that all the relevant stakeholders are, let's say, engaged within the project from the start, from the beginning, because that is really essential. Otherwise, you will not be able to share the mutual benefits. You will not reach the goals if not everything is on track. And it's more often, as you said in the statement in the beginning, less about the technologies itself. They need to work, they need to deliver, but it's very often also this interaction between the different actors which really makes the benefit and makes let's say, the situation that it's going to be a successful project, a successful implementation. So that's why stakeholder mobilization, we see it in a lot of projects, and especially in this, much more critical than probably other fields of innovation or technological implementation simply.
And Melanie, when we talk about mobilizing stakeholders, could you just sort of tell us what do you mean by mobilizing?
Well, I would say there are three most important topics when talking about mobilization. And this means actively identifying the stakeholders, engaging the stakeholders mostly through dialogues and collaborations. And the third important point is involving them and also building a shared commitment with those stakeholders all together.
Right. So I think we've all now on board about why the topic is important and what we're going to talk about. And I think that you have two case studies to present that were part of the CORALIS project. So, and the first one has to do with renewable hydrogen utilization. Maybe you could we could start with that.
Yeah, I will now try to more or less present a bit on the case studies that you mentioned, basically. I've prepared a couple of slides to be a bit more easy on the guidance for the participants towards what we're talking about. I hope you can see my slides. So what we've prepared is, as Marianna said, two case studies to be presented out of this Horizon-funded projects, and then we will also dive a bit more deeply into the stakeholder engagement and and coming to the case studies. So what we looked at in the framework of the projects are specific industrial parks spread it in Europe, in different European countries. So one was a steel shop in Spain, so an industrial agglomerate that is dedicated towards steel production. The second one is in Linz, Austria, on renewable hydrogen as a core topic, which we will dive a bit more in depth in the next minutes. And the third one is about valorization of, let's say, spent or used dirty caustic soda in a refinery process. So both cases that we will talk about are located in the heavy industry sector. A bit more probably to say on this overall project. So it is just part of a bigger endeavor. And we, as let's say, this specific work package, work on so-called follower industries. So the project has defined some demos where there were really implementations are taking place, where something is built, where something is monitored. And we, as the three sites, are taking up that spirit of industrial symbiosis, and with the support of on the one hand, stakeholder mobilization, and on the second end, towards implementation analysis via a certain road mapping process, we support the three cases. That is the supportive action where we most will talk about today. To do so, you need also some sort of a solid technical or economic or managerial basis. And for this, we performed also specific evaluations in terms of, for the Spanish case in Basauri, we looked at options for thermal energy recovery and storage systems for this steel shop. And the idea was to utilize the waste heat that is there towards, for example, district heating solutions, but also internally via thermal energy storages. For the Linz case, it was in fact that there is some sort of a lot of work going on for renewable hydrogen locally produced, but also potentially exchanged between different industry actors. And we have been looking for, we call those new business models or collaboration options between the players there. And the third one is on the reutilization of the spent caustic from a refinery industry. So you have a waste product from a normal refinery process that is spent caustic, and this could eventually potentially go in the future for other application, not internally upgraded, but reutilized in other circumstances, purposes, other industries, for example, paper, cardboard industry, or any other application that is thinkable for these spent materials. So that is the framework that we have been working on during the last years. And for today, we're just basically talking specifically on this stakeholder ecosystem and how to onboard the relevant stakeholders towards this common goal, towards this vision of strong collaboration. Coming to Linz, where we are located and where we more or less have the best knowledge on the specific case. It's about the renewable hydrogen. So the project basically investigated options for collaborative large-scale production, transport, storage, and use of renewable hydrogen for the industry site in Linz. There we have an integrated steel mill on the one side of the fence of the industrial park, so to say, and on the other side we have an ammonia fertilizer production facility. Both of them will need and more or less will need for their transition pathways renewable hydrogen. That is quite clear, and that's the way to go. Complementary to this core topic, we also looked at other options for industrial symbiosis. For example, waste heat recovery is in heavy industry always a big topic, and also the valorization of carbon dioxide as a resource, which is the most prominent climate gas. So based on renewable electricity, ammonia, and the gases that are already on site at both production facilities, we investigated collaboration options. How did we do this? So this chart or this slide should just give you a clue on more or less how we worked out the different, what we call case studies or so-called use cases. One topic was, okay, there is an existing hydrogen production facility on site. There will be an upscale or increase of on-site production via the other player in this environment, in this potential symbiosis environment. And we basically looked at the technical options on a rather high flight level. So just trying to combine different assets, different facilities, different streams on both industries, thinking about together in a task force, more or less filled by experts of all players locally, towards, okay, what are the options there? What do we have? Where can we probably end up in terms of mutual benefits? What are the mutual benefits? Quite clearly, it's about minimizing the costs for both players for that new asset, renewable hydrogen, and on the other side, maximizing the environmental benefit for both and materializing, let's say, also knowledge that is probably there already at one company, less at the other. Yeah. To also collaborate in that sense that knowledge is openly shared between the two players. Another, besides, as already mentioned, the single application of renewable hydrogen, we also looked at different use cases for industrial symbiosis in terms of taking the materials that are there and the assets, so the facilities for, let's say, for example, the steel gases, and then you have conventional and new process options at hand that can help you to transfer this to various new or existing products. One very, let's say, example that we looked at, we have on the one hand CO2 as a waste gas. When you marry it with the renewable hydrogen in a methanation plant, you will end up with methane as a substitute, as a potential substitute for the natural gas, which actually at the moment both players on site are using. How did we do that? We basically inaugurated a lot of meetings, a lot of exchange. We built up trust among the partners via building a so-called task force where experts from, let's say, from the industry, from the local industry, but also from associated research organizations, us, and also the Metallurgical Competence Center that is located on site. And with that kind of background of people and also collaboration, and with that specific task force, we analyzed each option that is there and tried to identify very specific, let's say, options to work together, to deepen the knowledge, to find the common benefits, the mutual benefits for the relevant actors, and to condense this some sort of short list, condense this long list, towards a short list for, okay, what could be the next steps in terms of collaboration? What do we still need? Which additional stakeholders, actors do we need to bring in our bubble? And what additional knowledge we might require? Which framework conditions probably need to change? What is the economic perspective? Is there a gap that requires funding? So these questions are basically discussed within those task forces and among the relevant stakeholders. And what was some sort of one output out of these discussions, when we broadened the perspective from the local side of the industry park, where we just had 2 partners also involved in the project, when we broadened this perspective, we developed a vision for a so-called sector coupling in the central region of, in the central local region of Upper Austria. So combining, let's say, as already mentioned, the different assets, the different streams. Here it is more energy related, quite clearly, also very much gas related, towards an more optimal system, a decarbonized system in the year 2040, to have a time frame on this as well. And then we can identify the needs for implementation, for testing, and also for further collaboration, quite clearly, based on this vision. Okay. So
Okay.
that was more or less my short spotlight on the Linz case. The question is, should we go on and present the Izmit case? Are there any questions already?
I thought that I could take some questions now on the Linz case. So you spoke a little bit about building trust, and that you created a task force that involved people, and you spoke about the importance of creating trust and also of a common vision. Is there any way that you can concretize a little bit? How did you actually work with this creating trust and the common vision?
I think it follows pretty much the idea of the stakeholder mobilization that we are also presenting during this webinar. You basically, very frankly speaking, pick up the people that are relevant for that certain case in the individual organizations, and you more or less mobilize them in terms of what are their specific concerns, what are their specific needs, because one solution, not necessarily for that player in that company, in that department, is a mutual benefit also for another person in the other company, probably at a different department or at a different managerial position. And so why the people are talking to each other, it's a bit more like less technical development than more politics or social science, as Melanie has more background in. But in general, the people are talking to each other, and you, via this, you identify those benefits, and then you generate trust. In the beginning, more or less, you just reveal certain information that are in general publicly available. But if you probably meet the 14th time, then you dive more deeply into the options that are there. And that is, in my point of view, this stepwise trust building and trusting also in that there is a common vision and a common goal that can be combined. At the beginning, the common vision is, okay, we have a target that all of us need to be carbon neutral at a certain point in time. But then you're breaking it down. What are the steps? Are there again mutual between different players or not? And then you are moving stepwise, and via this, you end up probably with a vision that is really kind of, let's say, quite comparable, and where everybody more or less says, okay, I will underline this and I would sign this. Also from their different perspective and background. So from the technical operational background and perspective up the hierarchy, and also broaden from the different actors, broadened by the different actors. And then you have a very solid basis for implementing the measures towards that common vision.
I understand. Good. And you know, there is this repetitive process, and it's stage by stage that you're building it up. Another question, the role of the government. I mean, in this case, was they a stakeholder that needed to be mobilized? Were they a stakeholder that was mobilizing others? What was the role of government in this case?
The government is in general, or let's say public authorities, quite essential for such a process, because they are setting the scheme, right? You have certain regulatory framework that you need to adhere to. You can probably gain or yield certain support in terms of financial support, but also, let's say, spreading the word among the different levels of government agencies, of governmental levels about that idea of cooperation. And then it is very, let's say, fruitful, to spread these words, because then you get additional backup, especially from these public authorities, for a certain idea and a potential cooperation, industrial symbiosis case. So setting the framework, setting potential or giving subsidies to finance the engaging also into that, and also, let's say, materializing the agencies and other associations that are affected or linked to governmental bodies, because then again you probably have access to information for the broader public, and you can more easily then also broaden this stakeholder map via the help of let's say governmental institutions. That was our experience in that case as well. And if you have the government that shares the same vision as the specific players, stakeholders identified in the first stage, then it's much more easy for sure to transport it to the highest level, and also to execution in the very end.
It seems like there are crucial ingredients for mobilizing the stakeholders, and then sometimes they mobilize, sometimes they need to be mobilized. It's like a continuous process. I think that we'll stop there with this case. Please, if people who are joining have questions, put them into the Q&A box as we can return to them at the end. And we can move on to the second case, I think, which is byproduct and waste stream utilization from an oil refinery.
Yeah, thank you. So you see here some pictures of the case study in Izmit, which is located at the toothbrush refinery there. The first step here was quite straightforward again. It is about reutilizing a waste byproduct of the existing process. What do you need to do? What do you need to know? You need to know the composition in terms of chemical, physical properties of the material at hand that should probably go out of the existing process and be implemented in another process from a waste to a resource. Then you need to search the relevant sectors. Okay, who could be interested in that material? And then you need to think of, okay, more concrete, what are potential partnerships, feasible addressants of that material, feasible off-takers. And that has been also done. And then it's about, okay, the technical, physical properties might match. And then it's about negotiation, bringing contracts into place, bringing economic benefits for this reutilization for the producer and the off-taker. But the initial step, also in this case, and that's why I'm stressing it a bit more, was also to provide a so-called visioning workshop. So how did it practically work? Local partners organized a bigger event where 21 organizations, all of that environment that I briefly mentioned, so potential off-takers, people that support this initiative in terms of local government bodies, NGOs, and so on, took place in that workshop. And besides this specific industrial symbiosis option that has been already on the table, also new opportunities during the workshop has been discussed. So it's always a bit of a living organism. And if there is some sort of a dead end for that material, for that case, there are always other options, right? In terms of, okay, probably we then can valorize CO2 as another off stream. We can look at waste heat utilization options, and also quite clearly challenges and limitations are already coming on the table in those events. And what we see as crucial is that there are always follow-up meetings, that are follow-up activities, broadening the stakeholder perspective from the small group, bringing it to a bigger group, or scratching out parts which are probably not, which are more or less a bit more than a dead end, not more than a dead end. And so this is changing, but from a common vision for all that actors, you can go into the next steps. So that was the case very briefly from Turkey, and we would now go into the stakeholder engagement and mobilization as one of our next action points.
Can I ask, 21 organizations were there, right?
Yeah,
How did you
exactly.
identify these 21 organizations?
I think one crucial role was here also on the facilitator, on the local facilitator, which is an association that is very broadly implemented in the local network of industries. And so then you have the contacts from people that are out of that sector, and then you can more or less bring them in and think of a potential application solution that could be relevant. So I think the facilitator role should be really emphasized in that context for that specific case also.
I mean, these are quite different cases. I mean, what are the big differences, if you can highlight them, between the cases? Also, maybe culturally, did you see differences? And also, did that affect the mobilization process?
It is definitely different because in especially the Linz case, we have much more framed already what do we want to think about. So there was already, okay, there are two companies, there have both more or less the same needs on the future perspective in terms of how to decarbonize their processes. So they will rely on renewable hydrogen to some extent. And then the idea was, okay, let's merge them together to benefit more or less from this. That was the case in Linz, and the difference in the Turkey was that we started, let's say, from scratch from a certain material, and then we more or less outreached to the outer world in terms of, okay, where can we put it? Who do we need for this? So I think it was less defined in that case, and in terms of cultural differences, it is quite clear that it is also again a very trust topic in terms of how to communicate, how to build up trust, how to share information, partly confidential information between partners. Some are more reluctant on doing so, and some are less. And this is definitely also some sort of a cultural topic. And what is quite clear is that also the local events in the project, we are a European project, have been performed in the local language. That everybody more or less has a real good understanding of what we're talking about. That not somebody from the outside is bringing in just the idea and that we need to digest it. So they could evolve the idea. They have been involved from the beginning and digest everything in their local cultural environment, how they feel comfortable about. So I think that is a bit of a difference, I would say. But from the level of maturity, it is not so much a difference because both are in a relatively early stage. So we will see where it will lead us in the upcoming months and years, and that again gives us the need of stepwise working on these solutions, and not for a couple of months and then there is a cut.
I understand. Melanie, is there anything that you would like to add to these to the perspective that Johannes has presented, either in addition to something that we haven't discussed that you might like to bring forward?
No, actually, I think the most important things have already been mentioned. For me, one of the most important aspects is this kind of building trust. I'm going to talk a little bit now about it, but I think that's one of the most important aspects one need to consider in those whole stakeholder processes.
Yeah, great. Then in that case, if we're ready, we can move on to the next section. Just to explain to the audience a little bit, we've had these two cases, and as Johannes talked about, there's also was another case in CORALIS, and then also based on literature. The researchers from Energy Institute at Johannes Kepler University have now made a road mapping tool that you can use to mobilize stakeholders, which I think that you'll present now. And I think also a publication coming from this soon, if I'm correct, because part of your PhD process, Melanie, right?
It's right. There's going to come a publication soon.
Yeah. Well, but go ahead, please. We're looking forward to seeing what you have to present.
Perfect. That was the wrong, I'm sorry. Oh, just closed, I'm sorry. Need 1 second. Here we go. Sorry for the delay. So perfect. Let's have a closer look at the process of stakeholder engagement and mobilization. So actually there are different approaches of engaging with stakeholders in a project and mobilization and also involving them accordingly. However, we could say that there are 5 steps for the stakeholder mobilization and engagement plan. The step 1 is the definition of all the relevant stakeholders involved in a project. This step takes place at the very beginning of a project and includes all stakeholders who are involved or affected in any way. The second step is the stakeholder analysis. This can take different forms and also differ from project to project. It often depends on what kind of project it is, which technologies are being considered, and what geographical or time horizons there are. Step 3 comprises the engagement planning. This is mostly about planning and structuring stakeholder involvement. And the aim here is to define clear strategies to ensure stakeholder participation in different phases of the project. This can be done by determining communication methods like we talked about workshops or surveys and digital platforms, and defining the stakeholder responsibilities and also their roles. The step 4 is about stakeholder engagement processes. The engagement process describes the specific steps for the stakeholder involvement. And regular meetings, workshops, or other interactive formats are organized here to promote a dialogue with the stakeholder, just to build this trust we have already been talking about. The step 5 is more important for those working on a stakeholder process. It is about creating some kind of measurability and appropriate indicators which measures the success of the engagement and also show how well the stakeholders are involved. Examples could be the participation rates in workshops, stakeholder satisfaction, or the impact of their inputs on the project. So let's go a little more into detail of those steps. As already mentioned, the first step in the stakeholder process is usually to define all the stakeholders. And the aim is to find out who is influenced by the project or can also influence the project themselves. It is important here that both private and also public stakeholders are considered. And from previous projects and also supported by relevant literature, it has been found that there are 6 groups that are usually the most relevant stakeholders. These include, like you can see here, the administration, politics, associations and NGOs, economic players, press and media, and also the civil society. And these stakeholders must be involved or informed in different ways throughout the entire project lifecycle. Talking about the step 2, the stakeholder analysis, perhaps we should take a step back and have a closer look what stakeholders actually are. Stakeholders can be groups or also individuals who either have an interest in the project, are involved in it, benefit from it, or are affected by the project in some other way. And how do we usually proceed in the stakeholder analysis? One of the first steps is usually a comprehensive literature research on the project content, the planned technology, the environment, and all those things. We then try to identify all relevant stakeholders and also their roles. And this is usually done on the basis of experience and, of course, in a constant exchange with the people involved in the project. They are involved from the very beginning and therefore know the best who is relevant. And in this step, the stakeholders and their tasks are already described and initial ideas are collected as to what the engagement activities could look like. And in the specific case of the CORALIS project, we worked with a tool we developed at the Energy Institute. It's called the Samba model. And yeah, you can see it on this slide. The model consists of various modules and aims to identify the opportunities and possibilities of the project, as well as the problems and also the challenges in the early project phases. This includes a classic stakeholder analysis, as already described, but also an environmental analysis, which deals with various indicators that can have an impact on the project and therefore also on the stakeholders involved. The aim is to build stable networks and collaborations and to be able to deal with potential problems right from the start. The identification and mobilization of stakeholders, networking within the follower cases and aspects of the social acceptance are politically addressed in this phase. And to this end, we conducted expert interviews in the CORALIS project. These were selected for all the 3 follower cases and came from diverse areas of the cases, such as the affected industries and the accompanying research partners. The stakeholders there provided valuable insights into where the biggest problems and challenges lay, and from which we were able to derive our first recommendations for action. Yes, and in the next step is the stakeholder engagement planning and process phase. It is important here that stakeholders should be actively involved right from the planning phase in order to identify their interests and needs. However, this can be done in different ways, and it must be identified which type is suitable for which stakeholder. And in this table on the slide, you can see the options that are available. So, for example, we have the informing level. The stakeholders here are informed without active engagement. In the monitoring level, the stakeholders are monitored so that their views can be taken into account, but not actively included. The third level is the negotiation level. Negotiations are conducted to reach a common understanding. Then in consulting, the stakeholders are consulted on specific, very specific topics. And in the evolving level, the stakeholders are actively involved in the project process. And for cooperating, so closer cooperations between the stakeholders and the project team are going to be achieved to have the common goals. It can prove useful to measure and evaluate stakeholder engagement on an ongoing basis. This means that throughout the course of the project, there should be continuous review of how well and how deeply the stakeholders are being engaged. This not only helps to track progress, but also to adjust or intensify the engagement where necessary to ensure that the project's objectives are met and the stakeholders all are satisfied. As an example here, you can see some of those indicator types, like in the quantitative form, the number of stakeholders, how many stakeholders are participating in the project activities, how many of the invited stakeholders show up to workshops, meetings, or other events. Out of the qualitative indicators, how is the stakeholder satisfaction and how is the quality of the relevance of the input. You can also see the indicators for result-oriented indicators, like the implementation of stakeholder recommendation for succession of the project. So, what were the most important methodological aspects for us in the CORALIS project? Which one turned out to be useful for the follower cases? This slide shows how we approached the mobilization of stakeholders in the CORALIS project. First, we identified all relevant actors and the strategies used through a comprehensive stakeholder analysis. We then used qualitative indicators to identify potential barriers and challenges. And using a SWOT analysis, we assessed the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and the threats of the project. And those paved the way for a clear roadmap to guide the entire project process. The next two slides show two example cases of the CORALIS project. Here you can see some of the results of the analysis in the project. As an example, you can see the SWOT analysis on the left, which is a detailed look on the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and threats identified in this case. This analysis helped to understand the relevant challenges and opportunities for also the stakeholder mobilization. The strengths identified were the support of the local government and legal and administrative aspects. So stakeholders from the areas of politics, administration, and law could therefore be identified as very positive supporters of the project. The main weaknesses identified were a lack of interest on the part of local administration and a lack of financial resources. So stakeholders who are active in this area of local administration therefore clearly needed to be more involved. An important aspect in this use case was that more involvement of the various stakeholders was needed to move the project forward. In particular, factors and players from business world were mentioned, as well as more commitment in the areas of law, administration, and general management. The same approach was used for the second example case. However, other things were, of course, important and decisive here, such as the clear potential to find other industries that could benefit from the project results, but that one of the main problems here was the legal hurdles. An inadequate legal situation posed major challenges for those who were involved. And the communication was also a significant overarching factor here. While the exchange of information and ideas was seen as a great opportunity, the challenge remained to break old patterns of behavior and maintain long-term communication. These analyses showed us that what specific measures were needed to improve collaborations between stakeholders, particularly with regard to communication processes. So, this slide shows the different methods we have identified in the CORALIS project to promote stakeholder mobilization in the field of industrial symbiosis. From interactive workshops to pilot projects and demonstration events, there are numerous ways to engage stakeholders and ensure that the success of the project. There is a particular focus on collaboration between public and private partners and the continuous monitoring and evaluation of project progress. And specific recommendations that we have identified and which have been applied across all the use cases can be seen on this slide. A key aspect of this is raising stakeholder awareness through awareness campaigns, which can be carried out through workshops, seminars, also webinars. These serve to raise awareness of the benefits of industrial symbiosis and provide stakeholders with the necessary knowledge. Another important point you can see is the stakeholder mapping, the targeted identification and involvement of the relevant players. This involves continuing the recognized potential stakeholders and actively integrate them into the process. And to facilitate the exchange of information and collaboration, the establishment of collaboration platforms is also recommended. In addition, incentives and benefits play an essential role in encouraging stakeholder participation. And also political support is very important. It is necessary to advocate for favorable political framework conditions and regulations that promote industrial symbiosis. And another key point is capacity building, as well as case studies and best practices. And finally, the promotion of networking and partnerships is also emphasized. These networks facilitate collaboration and knowledge exchange between stakeholders and create a basis for long-term cooperation. And these recommendations were collected and identified throughout the project and can be seen as the general recommendations for stakeholder mobilization in industrial symbiosis. So that's it from now, from my side.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, there's so much that we can pick up on here. I'm sort of thinking, what if I have now 10 minutes and there aren't that many questions in the chat? So the question is what to pick up on. And one thing which I really wanted to ask you was these indicators that you presented. Did you use them internally or did you use them to communicate to the group the success of the mobilization? So are they management tools for you or are they also used by the partners?
They're mostly used internally, but we try to recommend them to all the partners as well.
Yeah, and my colleagues from Linköping, Murat and Catherine, if you have any questions, please also jump in. I also wanted to ask you about these mobilization levels that you spoke about. How did you choose them? Was it just natural that they turned up, that these were the levels of mobilization, or were you actively choosing and progressing through them?
I would say that one of the most important aspects here are the expert interviews, because there we get a really great insight in the cases themselves. And the people we had the interview with, they have so great knowledge, and it then turned out how the stakeholders should be mapped in kind of categories.
Murat, I saw you had a question. Go for it.
Well, I have a question, but I think Christos has raised his hand. I don't know whether we are able to hear the participants, but...
No, we take those in the chat, so...
Okay, but Christos, can you then please make your question or statement in the chat if it hasn't come yet? Okay, to Johannes and Melanie, thank you so much for sharing these insights. I have a couple of questions. One of them is to you, Melanie, that you mentioned some key stakeholder groups, but the knowledge institutions was not listed among them. And you're a knowledge institution, and you played an amazing role in these different projects. Could you maybe reflect upon on that stakeholder group? That, of course, we are often not a direct member in symbiotic developments. We don't move resources or we don't change policies, etc. Nevertheless, I think we do play a role. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say, well, out of the 6 categories I showed you, they are mostly out of literature and experience and what people told us. We definitely fall into those categories because we are kind of overlapping. And we have definitely a great role, mostly in playing support and building up these cooperations and collaborations and bringing people together, talking about the most important aspects of building up an industrial symbiosis.
Yeah, if I may, I also have a follow-up question. When you mention these different strengths and changes that needs to take place in this context and different stakeholders, there's a bit of a asymmetry in the time frame that different changes require and take place. I mean, for example, it is relatively straightforward or relatively quick, or it can be relatively quick to actually engage stakeholders into a process so that they can start talking to each other, identify opportunities. Whereas if we need to change the policy framework or the policy ecosystem, we are most probably looking into years of change process. And that mismatch, does that create any loss of air, so to say? Because, you know, people engage in the process, they get excited, and they just say, and then they hit the wall. Okay, the policy needs to do something, and then the policy process takes forever. Did you come across any such experiences in your work?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say that this is kind of the interesting part of stakeholder engagement, but also the challenging part, because the roles of stakeholders can change throughout the times. So sometimes you have to monitor a group of stakeholders in the beginning, and then they kind of change to just be informed, and the other way around. So stakeholder processing is something that's being part of a project all the way through. And yeah, we as our institution, we have the opportunity to follow them through. So
yeah, there is a question in the chat, which either Johannes or Melanie might like to answer, or even maybe we. But the question is, can we apply this concept, and I'm guessing the concept of mobilizing stakeholders and the way you've presented it, to the specific area of not just industries collaborating, but industrial and built environment, so maybe more like urban symbiosis? How applicable is your concept to those contexts, if I understood?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that valuable question. May I take the opportunity to pick it up? We generalized a lot what we have presented today. That is probably quite clear and visible also in the slide decks, and the information is provided. That's why we are still trustworthy to the industry partners, because we're not revealing any secrets and still maintaining the progress. Coming back to the topic, that's why I think it's really, really useful and easy to use to apply this to a lot of engagement topics, to a lot of collaboration topics, absolutely not dedicated to a specific sector or an industry. Even I would probably find it more appealing partly to apply it to broader perspective on urban industrial symbiosis, besides not just to a very specific case, because then you can really broaden this stakeholder engagement, and you're dealing with a lot more groups, you're dealing with a lot more actors, and then you can also systematically more work through this method, and you have, let's say, a bigger sample, more or less research oriented spoken. And what is probably another another answer to that question, and also Marianna, you mentioned that we have provided a roadmap, and we basically disclosed it in this webinar and presentation. That was a follow-up activity, and there on the time frame we were looking at the measures to be taken from now, where the project is basically over, towards the next 5 years, to the time frame till 2030. So most important is that we are not losing the pace on this initial mobilization, that we keep on moving here, and that we are generating more specific new projects that follow up, that really this is going to be set into practice and into implementation, from idea to implementation, more or less. Yeah. And
I'm going to have to interject there, because I see we have 1 minute left. So you're saying something very important, that mobilization is just the first step, and then you have to keep the pace going. And I think that that's a very good place for us to stop today. Thank you very much, Johannes and Melanie, for joining, for the information that you have shared with us. I think that we've only begun to scratch the surface of this topic. We could just have several more webinars only discussing this, but we have other topics in 4 more webinars coming up, which are organized by us at Linköping University, and you see my colleagues here, Katrina and Morat. So I hope that the people attending can also join the upcoming ones. And thank you very much for today. And if you have more questions about stakeholder in mobilization, especially at the early stages, please feel free to reach out to Johannes and Melanie. Thank you very much
for participation, and for the great organization and postage of this webinar and also visit the CORALIS webpage for the deliverables that are out there. A lot of reports related to that. Please feel free to contact us on the specific webpage of the project or individual organizations, Linköping or Energy Institute. Thank you.
Yes, well done. The webinar will be, as Johannes said, available, as well as other materials available on CORALIS webpage.